Did your family have favorites? If so, were you the favorite or someone else?
So, my mom tried to swap out my actual dad like he was some used couch she was bored of. Like I'd just forget the man who raised me because she found herself a shiny new boyfriend who told her she looked 28. And then she told me, dead serious, I want you to start calling Derek Dad. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just said, sure. She had no idea I never lost touch with my real dad. What she also didn't know, that I was about to make her little fantasy blow up from the inside. Here's the part one wanna ask you, has someone in your family ever tried to rewrite history, like you weren't there living it? You ever watch someone smile while they delete the parts of your life that don't fit their new vibe? Yeah, same. And trust me, I didn't just sit there and take it. I played along. And then I made her regret every second of thinking I was dumb enough to fall for it. You know how some people go through a midlife crisis and buy a motorcycle or take up yoga or start drinking green juice like it's a personality? My mom decided to reinvent herself by pretending her entire past didn't happen, including the part where she had a husband and a daughter who remembered everything a little too well. She didn't just want to move on, she wanted to replace. Clean slate. And I didn't even realize it until I walked into her house one Sunday, and there was this strange man sitting in my dad's old chair, drinking my dad's favorite beer, smiling like he owned the place and had been there forever. I hadn't seen her in a few months, and she'd been weirdly vague every time I asked about how things were going. She kept saying things like, life's finally turning a corner, or I'm starting to feel like myself again, and I thought she meant emotionally. I didn't know she meant she'd met someone and decided to hit the reset button on the last 30 years. I sat down across from the guy, and before I could even ask who he was, my mom leaned in, put her hand on my knee, and said, I want you to start calling Derek Dad. He's stepping into that role now. I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. I thought maybe she was testing some weird dating app bit on me. But no, she meant it. Full voice. Full eye contact. Derek is going to be your father figure now, she said, like we were just casting parts in a play and my real dad hadn't existed. Like I'd just forget the man who sat through every one of my dentist appointments and taught me how to drive and stood in the freezing cold for every band concert I ever played. So I nodded. I smiled. And I said, okay, sure, Mom. She didn't know I still talked to my dad almost every day. She didn't know I'd been over at his place 2 days earlier, helping him set up a new router and talking about whether he should try online dating. She didn't know we had dinner every other Thursday and a running joke about how she used to microwave spaghetti. Because I stopped telling her things years ago. Not because I hated her, because she stopped earning the right to know them. The thing is, my mom was always about appearances. Growing up, it was more important that we looked normal than that we actually were. When my parents divorced, she didn't cry, she didn't fight, she just moved on like she'd switched cable providers. And for a while, I thought maybe that was strength. But now I see it wasn't that she moved on, it was that she deleted. That was her thing. If something didn't serve her anymore, she just cut it out and filled the space with something shiny. Derek was shiny. Derek told her what she wanted to hear. Derek had a retirement account and teeth that sparkled and some slick charm that probably worked on women who didn't ask a lot of questions. But I do ask questions. And I don't forget. So when she said, call him Dad, what she didn't realize is that she handed me the playbook. She gave away her game without even realizing she'd done it. Because what kind of person thinks they can reassign a role like that and expect it to stick? What kind of woman tells her daughter to start pretending her real father never existed? And if you're thinking I lost it, or got into a screaming match, or stormed out and slammed the door, I didn't. I stayed for dinner. I asked Derek polite questions about his job. I asked if he liked dogs or cats better. I even offered to help with the dishes. Because I knew I was going to handle this my way. Quietly. Carefully. And on my timeline. That night I drove home, poured myself a glass of wine, and called my dad. I told him what happened, word for word. He didn't say much at first, just sat on the other end of the line, breathing. Then he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to let it play out for a little while. But when the time's right. I want them both to know I never once believed the lie. And I want to be the one who makes it all fall apart. Because if there's one thing my mom forgot in her little rebrand, it's that I remember everything. Every lie. Every time she chose convenience over connection. Every time she showed me what kind of woman she really is underneath the yoga quotes and filtered selfies. And if she wants to play fake family with some guy who thinks calling me kiddo makes us close, fine. I can play that game better than she can. But I don't bluff. And I don't fold. Next episode, I'll tell you what I found out about Derek and why pretending to like him was the best decision I ever made. When I was a kid, my mom wasn't exactly what you'd call hands-on. She was there, technically. She packed lunches, signed field trip forms, showed up to the big things, but emotionally, she was always somewhere else. Meanwhile, my dad, he wasn't flashy, but he was solid. He was the one who remembered I had a math test, who made sure I had my asthma inhaler on me, who sat in that freezing gym every Saturday morning watching me play volleyball even when I barely touched the ball. After the divorce, I lived with him full-time. My mom got her weekends, but she barely took them. Sometimes she'd cancel last minute because she had a work thing or was exhausted, and I'd end up back at Dad's, where it was quiet, familiar, and honest. So this idea that she could just insert Derek and erase the man who actually raised me, it wasn't just tone deaf. It was cruel. And it was stupid. But I didn't react right away because I knew my mom. If I pushed, she'd just double down. She always did. The louder you called out the lie, the tighter she held onto it. So I smiled. I told her Derek seemed nice. I even added him on Facebook, which turned out to be the smartest move I could have made. Derek wasn't hard to figure out. Within a week, he'd liked 3 of my old posts, none of them recent, and sent me a message that said, "Your mom talks about you all the time. Hope we can get close too." Now, I don't know what kind of grown man tries to bond with a fully adult woman by playing the bonus dad role, but everything about him rubbed me the wrong way. Still, I didn't delete the message. I wanted a record. I also started looking through his profile and noticed something off. A lot of pictures were just him. A few were of him and my mom, but the captions were strange, like he was always performing. Lucky man with a beautiful queen, or starting a new chapter with the real ones. Stuff that just didn't feel real. And then I saw it, a comment on one of his posts from a young woman named Mandy. "Call me when she goes to bed," it said. Now, I don't jump to conclusions. For all I knew, it was a joke or an old friend messing around. But something about it stuck with me, so I clicked her profile. She looked young. Like, way too young. Her page was private, but her profile picture was just the 2 of them at what looked like a restaurant, and the date was only 3 weeks before I met him. Again, I didn't say anything. I just screenshotted everything. The next time I visited my mom's, I asked more questions. I told her Derek seemed like he'd really been through stuff, and she lit up. She said he'd had a rough marriage, a difficult daughter who cut him off for no reason, and that he deserved a second chance. That was her new favorite phrase, second chance. Like it was a brand new product she just discovered. Everything in her life now was about reinvention. And it wasn't just Derek. She had new friends, a new gym, new cookware, even a new dog. Nothing familiar. She was wiping the slate clean, but she was doing it with this bizarre optimism, like she believed no one would remember the first version. But I remembered. I remembered her forgetting birthdays, showing up late to parent-teacher conferences, pretending she was struggling financially while buying herself a new phone every year. My dad never badmouthed her. Not once. And now she was rewarding that silence by pretending he never existed. I didn't confront her that day either. But I did go home and call Aunt Tammy. Now, Tammy is my mom's sister, and the 2 of them have always been hot and cold, best friends one year, not speaking the next. But Tammy always liked my dad, and she's one of the few people in our family who tells the truth even when it's ugly. I asked her if she knew anything about Derek, and she paused. And when Tammy pauses, it means she's deciding whether to say something that might start a fire. Eventually, she said, "Your mother met him at a silent retreat. He was leading it. He's one of those life coach types. No license. No degree. Just charisma and a folder full of motivational quotes." Then she said, "Be careful, Rachel. Your mom has a way of falling in love with ideas, not people. That sentence stuck with me. Because that's exactly what this was. My mom wasn't in love with Derek. She was in love with the story. She was in love with being the woman who moved on, rebuilt, found love again with a man who understood her. She didn't care who he actually was, only what he represented. And that was dangerous. Because people like that don't ask questions. They ignore red flags. They explain away bad behavior because the narrative matters more than the reality. But I wasn't playing along for fun. I had a plan. I just needed one more piece of information. So I started talking to my dad more intentionally. Not just the casual check-ins, but real conversations. I told him what was going on. I showed him the screenshots. I told him about Mandy. And he didn't get angry. He just asked, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to break their little fantasy. But not by yelling. I want to let them think I've bought in. And then I want to pull the rug out so hard that neither of them knows which way is up." Because when someone tries to erase your life like it never happened, you don't just stop them, you make sure they feel it. You make sure they remember that the person they tried to overwrite was never asleep. You were watching the whole time. Next episode, I'll tell you how I got Derek to start trusting me, and how I used that trust to make him say way more than he should have. I don't think Derek ever expected me to like him, but I also don't think he expected me to be so quiet. That's the thing about guys like him. They can read loud people, the ones who get emotional or confrontational, but they have no idea what to do with someone who smiles and nods and lets them keep talking. So I leaned into it. I let him feel like I was warming up to him. I started asking him casual questions. I laughed at his dumb stories. I gave him just enough attention that he started letting his guard down around me, which turned out to be the best decision I could have made. The more time I spent with them, the more it felt like my mom was living in a place she was directing. Everything had to look perfect. She'd tell me to come over and then make a big show of how relaxed and natural everything was, even though you could practically hear the effort she was putting into it. She kept repeating things like, "Doesn't this feel like a real family again?" Or, "Isn't it nice having a man around who actually wants to be involved?" It was always little digs, indirect shots at my dad, and every time she said one, I had to clench my jaw to keep from snapping. But I didn't take the bait. I just nodded and asked Derek how his coaching business was going, and every time I asked him a question like that, he couldn't shut up. He started bragging about how many clients he had, how he helped people manifest real change, how people just gravitated toward his energy. He sounded like a walking TED Talk, but none of it made sense. No office, no website, no certifications, and when I asked if I could refer someone, he said he only worked by invitation. That was my first real confirmation that something was off. He wasn't a life coach, he was a con artist. A charismatic one, sure, but a con nonetheless. And the more he talked, the more obvious it became that my mom was his latest project and that she was deep enough into the fantasy to ignore the holes. I needed someone who could back me up. Not emotionally, I already had my dad for that. I needed someone who knew my mom from the inside out, someone who wasn't afraid to hurt her feelings if it meant telling the truth. So I went back to Aunt Tammy, and this time I was direct. I told her about the Mandy messages, the fake job, the love bombing, all of it. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded and said, "I've seen this movie before." Apparently, this wasn't the first time my mom had brought home a man and tried to force him into a role that didn't fit. After the divorce, before Derek, there had been another guy, some fitness trainer she met at a wellness retreat. She told Tammy she was in love after 2 weeks and even tried to bring him to Thanksgiving, but bailed at the last minute because he had travel complications, which turned out to mean he was married and had ghosted her. Tammy said she's been chasing this version of herself for years, the woman who didn't just survive divorce, but leveled up from it. And I get it, to a point. Nobody wants to feel like the one who lost in a breakup. But my mom wasn't just moving on, she was rewriting history. She wanted me to be the daughter who applauded her new life, who sat politely while she buried the one parent who actually showed up. And that wasn't going to happen. Not quietly, anyway. So I kept digging. I went through Derek's public posts. I cross-referenced names. I found another woman, older than Mandy, commenting heart emojis on everything he posted. I clicked her name, and her page was public enough that I could piece together the timeline. She'd posted photos of Derek at her birthday party just a month before he moved in with my mom. In one, he was giving a toast, holding a wine glass, captioned, "To second chances." That seemed to be his favorite phrase. Funny how it kept showing up. I printed every screenshot. I saved every comment. I organized it all, not for drama, not for some big screaming match, but because I wanted control. I wasn't going to burst into tears or throw plates across the room. I wasn't going to beg my mom to see the truth. I was going to show her. Calmly. Directly. In a way she couldn't dismiss or spin. But I needed the right moment. So I waited. I kept playing the part of the slowly warming daughter. I let Derek believe he was winning me over. And just when I felt like he was getting too comfortable, I dropped the first hint. We were having dinner, me, my mom, Derek, and I brought up a friend of mine who had a complicated relationship with her father. I said, she found out he was seeing someone young enough to be his daughter. Totally messed with her head. Derek tensed. My mom didn't catch it, but I did. Then I looked directly at him and asked, "Derek, do you ever talk to your daughter Mandy anymore?" It was like the room paused. Just a beat. Just long enough. He didn't say anything. My mom looked confused. I smiled, took a bite of my salad, and said, "You mentioned her once, right? Or did I imagine that?" He muttered something about a strained relationship, and my mom jumped in to change the subject, but the message was sent. I knew. And he knew I knew. That night, I got a message from Derek. No greeting. Just, "What exactly are you trying to do here?" I didn't reply. Because I wasn't trying anymore. I was doing it. Quietly. Strategically. And I wasn't done. Next episode, I'll tell you what happened when I invited them both, along with a few surprise guests, to dinner. And how I used Derek's own words to blow his little performance to pieces. I knew I couldn't just tell my mom the truth about Derek and expect her to believe me. She never did well with confrontation, especially when it threatened the version of herself she wanted the world to see. If I came at her with facts, she'd call me jealous or say I was being dramatic or accuse my dad of poisoning me against her. She'd twist it into something about her being misunderstood or unappreciated, and I'd come out of it looking like the unstable one. So I didn't do that. I set the stage. I built the whole thing so carefully that by the time the truth came out, there would be no way for her to deny it without embarrassing herself in front of the very people she was trying to impress. I told her I wanted to have a little family dinner. Something small. Just the three of us, plus Aunt Tammy, since she was the only other family member who's ever had my back, as my mom liked to put it when she was trying to guilt-trip me. My mom was thrilled. She thought it was progress, that I was finally coming around to her new life, and she spent the whole week texting me recipes and asking what kind of wine I liked. It was like she thought this was the moment I'd finally embrace Derek as my second father, and she could close the book on the version of me who remembered the past. What she didn't know was that I also invited one more guest, my dad. And I didn't tell her he was coming. That was deliberate. I wasn't trying to spark a screaming match. I just wanted him in the room when everything came out, because he deserved to hear it all firsthand. He deserved to see how little she thought of the truth and how much she was willing to lie just to keep her fantasy alive. I called him the night before and said, "I need you to just sit and listen. Let me lead." He didn't ask a lot of questions. He just said, "I'll be there." When everyone arrived, my mom was in full hostess mode. She poured wine, made small talk, acted like everything was effortless, even though you could see the tension in her smile when she noticed Tammy wasn't exactly playing along. Then she saw my dad. She froze for just a second, not angry, but thrown off. She blinked hard, like she wasn't sure if she should make a scene or just ride it out. Eventually, she said, "Oh wow. This is unexpected." I said, "Well, if Derek's the new dad, I figured the old one deserved to meet him, right?" It was the first time I saw Derek look uncomfortable. He shook my dad's hand with a little too much energy, like he wanted to assert something, and my dad, being who he is, didn't flinch. He just looked him in the eye and said, "I've heard a lot." That was it. No smile. No fake warmth. Just a simple statement that made Derek shift in his seat like his shoes were too tight. Dinner started off quiet, but I didn't wait long. About 10 minutes in, I pulled out a small folder. I placed it on the table like it was nothing, then I looked at Derek and asked, "Mind if I share something?" My mom immediately tensed, but she didn't say no. I opened the folder and started sliding things across the table. Screenshots. Comments. Post timestamps. One by one. I didn't even have to explain. The names, the dates, the tone, it all said enough. Derek tried to laugh it off at first. "These are old," he said. "You don't understand the context." I looked at him and said, "Then help me. Because from what I can see, you were calling another woman your soulmate the same week you told my mom she was your fresh start. And that Mandy girl? You told her you were only with my mom for the house and the connections. You told her you were just buying time until your next phase. Should I keep going?" My mom looked at him like she'd been slapped. She turned to him and said, "Is that true?" And he, being exactly who I suspected he was, didn't deny it outright. He said something about how complicated life was, about how people say things in moments of weakness, and how Rachel clearly has unresolved issues with me. He tried to flip it back onto me, classic move. But that's when Tammy jumped in. Tammy, who had stayed quiet up to that point, looked him dead in the eye and said, "I've seen your type a dozen times. You find women who are just lonely enough and feed them just enough attention to make them think they're special. But you're not smart enough to cover your tracks. You're lazy, and you thought no one was watching." Then she looked at my mom and added, "And you let this happen. Because you're so desperate to look like you're winning, you ignored every sign." And that's when my mom lost it. But not at Derek. At me. She turned to me with tears in her eyes, not because she was heartbroken, but because she was embarrassed. She said, "Why would you do this to me in front of everyone? Why couldn't you just talk to me privately?" And I told her, flat out, because I did not trust you to hear me unless you had an audience. Because every time I've tried to tell you the truth, you've made me the villain. You lied to yourself, you let a stranger move into your life, and then you told me to erase my own father from memory like he never existed. So no, I wasn't going to do this in private. You made it public when you told me to call him Dad. Then I stood up. I looked at Derek and said, "You can go now. You're done here." And then I looked at my mom and said, "You can pick up the pieces. Or not. But I'm not fixing any of this for you." I walked out, and my dad followed. He didn't say anything until we got to the car. Then he said, "I've never been prouder of you." That dinner wasn't about making a scene. It was about reclaiming the truth. It was about showing my mom that no matter how many times she tried to rewrite the script, I would not be recast. In the next episode, I'll tell you what happened in the weeks after. How my mom tried to spin the story, how Derek disappeared, and how I finally gave myself the closure she never could. After that night, there was silence, not the angry kind, not even the hurt kind, just the kind that hangs in the air when people finally see something they were trying their hardest not to. I didn't hear from my mom for 2 full weeks. No texts, no calls, no attempts to spin it or walk it back or pretend it was all a misunderstanding. Just silence. And, honestly, that was louder than any apology she could have tried to fake. I think for the first time, she realized that her grip on the story was gone. She didn't control the narrative anymore, and that terrified her more than the fact that Derek turned out to be a fraud. Derek, for his part, disappeared exactly the way guys like him always do. No confrontation, no accountability, just gone. I found out later from Tammy that he left behind a mess of unfinished bills, an empty account that my mom had co-signed on, and a few half-baked excuses about business ventures falling through. He didn't even try to fight for the relationship, which told me everything I needed to know about his intentions from the start. He was never there for her. He was there for the setup, the access, the image, the free ride, and the second it got uncomfortable, he cut the cord and vanished. The fallout wasn't dramatic, but it was quiet in a way that hurt more. My mom didn't want to talk about what had happened, but I know from Tammy that she tried to spin the story to a few friends, said it was a miscommunication, said I had never really accepted her happiness, said I'd ambushed her out of jealousy or some leftover resentment from childhood. And I didn't correct any of it. I let her talk. Because I didn't need to defend myself anymore. I had said what needed to be said, and anyone who knew me, who really knew me, didn't buy her version of it for a second. For a while, I didn't respond to anything. Not the calls she eventually started making, not the messages that shifted from silence to guilt to anger to some half-baked apology about how she just wanted to be loved again. She didn't understand, and maybe she never would, that love doesn't work like that. You don't get to bulldoze the past and hand your daughter a script and expect her to play along just because it makes your new life more comfortable. Love takes history into account. It respects what came before, even if it wasn't perfect. Eventually, I wrote her a letter. Just 1 page. I didn't explain myself or go into detail or try to make her see anything she didn't already know deep down. I wrote 1 sentence. Next time you want to erase someone, make sure they're not smarter than you. I didn't sign it with love. I didn't include a return address. I just mailed it and left it there. I needed her to know that what happened wasn't emotional revenge, it was strategic. It was planned. And it worked because I didn't let my feelings cloud the facts. My dad and I kept talking, kept seeing each other like always, except now there was a deeper sense of peace between us, not because things were suddenly perfect, but because he knew I'd taken the hit for him, and not just for him, but for myself. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life pretending that what she did wasn't selfish and hurtful and calculated. And I didn't need her to admit it anymore. I'd stopped needing that the second she told me to call someone else Dad, like my real father hadn't earned every inch of that title. A few months later, she posted some vague quote on social media about healing through solitude and how the people who hurt you the most often think they're helping. It was typical of her, just cryptic enough to draw sympathy without giving anything real. I didn't respond. I didn't call. I just screenshotted it and sent it to Tammy with the caption, "She's still acting like the victim." Tammy replied, "She's always been better at storytelling than living." And that's what it came down to. My mom didn't need closure. She needed control. And when I took that away, even for a second, she didn't know what to do with herself. I'm not going to tell you this ended in some warm embrace or a mutual understanding or a sudden realization that we all just wanted the same thing. It didn't. And honestly, I don't want that. I don't need a picture-perfect ending to feel like I did the right thing. Because I did. She told me to call him Dad. So I did what any daughter with a memory and a plan would do. I reminded her who actually raised me, and I let her destroy herself trying to pretend otherwise.